You could call it the battle of the media titans. Liberty Global is a TV, broadband, and telephone behemoth with annual revenues of over $18 billion. Netflix began life as a DVD mail order service. Now its NetStream service has over 50 million subscribers worldwide. Both companies are going vertical and making content. Both are plagued by M&A rumors. And both have very different views on net neutrality.
If we're supposed to pay some of the cost of the network, maybe we should get some of the broadband revenue.
Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, is a pretty ambitious executive and has a real plan ahead of himself. But Liberty Global also has focus management and an ambitious strategy themselves.
It all works theoretically until one particular content provider, yourselves, represents a disproportionate amount of the traffic.
Netflix's Reed Hastings and Liberty Global's Mike Fries in a debate you cannot afford to miss.
One thing I will say as a form of introduction is what maybe you want to be known for by the time you retire in, I don't know when that will be, 5 years or so, 10 years, 20 years.
Ouch! Am my board members out there? I hope
Yeah.
Mike,
Yes.
I think you want to be called the king of European cable or, correct me if I'm wrong, king of European content.
Clearly, we're in the cable business, and that's the vast majority of what we do. And content's increasingly important to us. Content's incredibly important to our consumers. So I think we're all in the content business, whether we like to be or not. And we're investing more in content these days. I think most of you have read about the few deals we've done. We are looking at over-the-top content and free-to-air broadcasting and production and sports because it's our view that we need to make sure we're fueling the distribution business with great stuff and we're not being excluded from great stuff. But we're doing this very strategically, opportunistically, and offensively, and not on an $80 billion enterprise value business to put a few $100 million into this or that doesn't really change our strategy. So we're very much a cable company first.
All right, Reed, what do you want to be known for? King of streamers, king of content, anything that I haven't touched on?
In terms of Netflix, I think we're just trying to figure out what this over-the-top internet-based video means. We're as curious and uncertain about the roles of smart TVs and handheld devices as anybody. And so we're feeling our way along and, growing in various ways. So I would say, figuring out internet TV.
I'm looking at some of the research that was put out by the guys over at Goldman Sachs, and they probably pulled an all-nighter to do this as usual, but they say that Netflix's addressable audience of subscribers will more than double over the next 3 years to more than 200 million. Does that sound about right to you? 30% penetration?
Well, the addressable market is really the world's internet users. So sure, that might be the right one in the 2-year time frame. But fundamentally, the internet is a global phenomena. And China has a big firewall, and that part makes that uncertain. But other thing outside of that, essentially, we're moving towards having a big coherent offering of global content and having it be accessible globally like any other internet service.
Mike, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Netflix coming to Europe. Is that a threat? Is it an opportunity? How do you feel about it?
Oh, listen, I think it's a positive in some respects, and I'll describe, that might sound like a surprise to some of our cable brethren here. I'll explain why. But net, it's good for everybody. Listen, it's a great app. And what Netflix exposed for all of us is that our app needs to be better. And what we've done with Horizon, and I've got it on my mobile here too, is we've got the best television on all your devices and a really cool user interface. And when we get that app right, which Netflix has helped us learn, I think we're in great shape. On the flip side of that, our broadband consumers are consuming more broadband. That's good for us. And we haven't lost any customers anywhere that we're aware of, and I don't think you've seen that in the States either. So I think it's a good story for journalists sometimes, and in the end, we have a lot more in common than perhaps not. And the last point I'll make is, as we all know, sitting in this room, is video in Europe is pretty inexpensive. So it isn't like the U.S. where you've got a $120 cable bill and a very soft underbelly. We've got a pretty reasonable package that we sell to people. And so in the UK, where Netflix is incorporated into the TiVo box, the customers that have downloaded the app onto our box, like 500,000 of them or more, watch more television, churn less, and they're happier. So I think it's all good. Consumers are happy, we're happy.
Is it really all good? You sound incredibly dismissive and sanguine about that threat, which is Netflix.
You were
Why-
hoping I would bite on that, right?
An
It's
example-
true. I'm serious. That's how I feel about it.
But if we look in the U.S., where Netflix is most developed, we've grown to 35 million members in the U.S., so about a third of all households. And cable satellite has been steady at 100 million. So if there was a significant threat of either cord cutting or cord shaving, it would have shown up by the time we're a third of households. Consumers look at us like they look at having DVDs or going to the movie theater. It's one more supplemental entertainment expense. And it has not been a catastrophe for any, even HBO. We used to be like, we have to beat HBO. And then we realized, gosh, most Netflix employees, we're all HBO subscribers because they have great shows. And then we really, people will multiply subscribe to these services, and we shouldn't worry about whether we're bigger than HBO's 130 million or not. What we should do is just try to have the best content we can. And HBO will be really successful, and hopefully we will be.
Listen, this industry has reinvented itself many times in the last 50 years, and we are now at a point of reinventing ourselves again. And it's because we have to keep innovating. We have to keep developing great products and great consumer experiences.
Reed, just very briefly, want to come back to your expansion into Europe.
Yep.
Now, you've launched in 6 European countries. What's next? Portugal, Spain, Italy? Where are you putting your eyes on?
Well, our pattern is for the next few months now that we just launched, we'll spend a lot of time in France and Germany trying to learn and improve and adjust, and then we'll decide next year to either expand more in Southern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe. So we're not yet sure. But over the next 3 or 4 years, think of us as at least trying to expand, around the globe. What we've said is for new countries, we target break even in 3 to 5 years in an individual country. It can vary, and that's what we have in our Excel. It doesn't mean that's going to be reality, but it's sort of the forecast. And then what we're targeting is to get to a third of households in new countries over about 7 years. And that's what we did in the U.S. We're about a third of households over 7 years. So again, that's what we have in our spreadsheets. It's what we judge success by. And then cumulative profitability for Europe or for the country depends on what stage each of the constituent parts are. And we're rapidly expanding.
Mike, I want to come back to you because you very briefly touched on the issue of net neutrality just before. Where exactly do you stand on this? Do you think that Netflix should be paying you guys?
The truth of the matter is, I think net neutrality is a consumer issue. I don't think it's an issue that we should be debating about as B2B partners. The truth of the matter is, we believe in net neutrality when it comes to not discriminating against content in the last mile, not choosing winners and losers, making sure that when we say it's 100 megabits, it is 100 megabits. That's for sure. There is so much competition. All of us compete with so many ISPs in Europe. It's not like the US. We couldn't afford to play tricks with a popular service like Netflix. We just lose our customers like that tomorrow. So I think it's a bit of a red herring, this whole net neutrality debate, in my opinion. But it's important to get it right, and hopefully important to get it right across Europe in some consistent manner. The other half of the net neutrality debate about IP interconnect, which is a more technology and technical conversation, there is no issue today. I mean, Netflix can find our networks. This is about how Netflix gets to us, not how Netflix gets to our consumers. And there's lots of ways that can happen. There's plenty of peering arrangements. There's no breakdown in peering arrangements that we're aware of. So in the end, it'll be a commercial arrangement like it is today. All of our peering arrangements for the last decade are handshake deals, and we make deals with other peering companies, and we get the content to the consumers when they need it. The risk has been, not the risk, the debate has been when for years and years, two guys shake hands, and then all of a sudden one guy comes with 3 backpacks and 4 suits, bags of luggage, and shaking the hand now is requiring a lot more to do because he's carrying more. How do you share that cost? And that's the issue we'll have to figure out, and it might be a different arrangement in every market. I think that's the nut of the issue. But I don't believe it's a regulatory issue, personally. I don't think regulators have any business in this topic. There's not a single regulator, and I apologize to those who might be in the audience, who have done anything to make the internet great. It's just the reality of it. It's great because it evolves on its own organically. And I really don't think this is an issue regulators need to regulate, so to speak. Certainly not in Europe.
That's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? How do you feel about it?
One side of the argument is, hey, Netflix, you're using 30% of the internet, you ought to pay some of the cost. That's a good soundbite. But on the other hand, with TCP and with consumer firewalls, we look at it and say, we're not using anything. Consumers are choosing Netflix. And if we're supposed to pay some of the cost of the network, maybe we should get some of the broadband revenue. So we say playfully to Mike, we'll pay 10% of your network cost if we get 10% of broadband revenue. Or we'll pay 10% of your network cost if you want to pay 10% of our content cost. But in fact, all of those are very complicated propositions. And so we're trying to socialize the need and the power of just open, no-charge interconnect for everybody, not just for us. And that will give everyone stable economics and allow a great platform for innovation. And the crazy thing in this whole debate is that the actual amount of money being talked about is trivial to both of us. But we're both worried on both sides about the precedent and what does it mean in the long term.
It's a valuable precedent to be concerned about, though, because I don't disagree with the things you're saying. It all works theoretically until one particular content provider, yourselves, represents a disproportionate amount of the traffic, which is to your credit, because you're successful. So let me grant you that. It's because people love your stuff, and that's terrific. And I don't have a problem with that. But my point, though, is it gets a little bit trickier when 30% or whatever the numbers are of the entire internet in the U.S. is comprised of one provider. And then so should everybody, well, the question that we ask as ISPs, should everybody pay when only 30% are using it? It's a common question. It gets asked in a ton of industries. Should 100% of the people pay for the investment that's required to supply services to 30% of the people who are voraciously consuming something? And it's an age-old economic question. It applies in every business, whether it's utility business or consumer business. So it's not a crazy argument to have. And I agree with you. It's small amounts of money in the end. And
let me try to see why it might be a crazy argument. So if we split into 3 different companies and then we're below 10% for the 3 different companies, then we're not a problem.
It depends on how you're arriving on the network, right? It depends if you're coming through one particular peering point or multiple peering points. You're a victim of your own success. This is not your fault. I mean, you have so many consumers that love your stuff. There you are. I mean,
on that we agree.
I'll give you an example. Okay. If we were to test the speeds of all the over-the-top video providers on our network who come to us at that peering point, you may or may not be the fastest, depending on how much bandwidth you're consuming or acquiring to get it there. And so the tests that you do, where we're the slowest or the fastest, really aren't measuring our last mile. It's measuring how efficiently your content's coming to our networks. And that's your choice, how you get the content there and how many pipes you use. And so, I mean, it's a complicated argument that does get simplified in the press, and I'm okay with that in the end. But this audience gets it, I think, and you and I get it, and so hopefully it'll all work out, because I come back to the same point. If my consumers are happy using our broadband service, I'm happy.
Stay with us on Media Money. After this short break, Mike and Reed will give us their views on the future of the industry.
Anything that helps us win the customer's mind share or share of wallet and be their connection, that's good for us. And if sometimes that means owning content, then I think that's what we'll do.
Google's an incredible company, and they're enormously technically aggressive and curious. They're not particularly interested in high-end content in the way that both of our businesses are.
Welcome to Media Money. I'm Carolyn Roth here in Copenhagen at the Euro Summit Cable Marketing Conference. In this show, we're going to hear from 2 CEOs of the biggest players in the industry, Netflix's Reed Hastings and Liberty Global's Mike Fries.
You're going to be speaking in front of European regulators very soon in Brussels. Do you feel that they're in any way easier to deal with than the U.S. regulators?
They're just different.
How? Just how?
How are they different? In the U.S., it's been net neutrality is front and center. Percentage of the population that's familiar, and the FCC recently did a comment period on some fast lane, slow lane regulation, and there was over 3 million comments. It was twice as many comments as they've ever gotten in the history of the FCC. So it's a very a gut issue about net neutrality. Not everyone can define it precisely, but it sort of represents an open and fair internet that people want.
Google, for a long time, has been at the forefront of net neutrality debate. They have been pretty quiet over the last couple of years just because they were in the crosshairs with the Republicans, with the Democrats. Now everyone's saying, you guys, Netflix is at the forefront of that debate. Are you comfortable with being the face of net neutrality?
Well, I think the face of net neutrality is really a broad range of companies and organizations, nonprofits. You have political speech.
It's Netflix, isn't it?
No, I don't really think so. I think, we continue to say what we think, but there's a broad range of companies that have been willing to stand up for this. And it's it's not around the world. It's not that ISPs are blocking services. And so really there's very few ISPs opposed to net neutrality. I think we're all trying to wrestle with what happens if we regulate it formally and what could be some of the potential downside of that, what could be the positives. And we've often called for just a voluntary code if all the major ISPs said, here's a set of principles by which we're going to operate in terms of net neutrality. I think that would take the pressure out of it. But we haven't been able to agree on really those principles, and then do they apply to mobile or not? Do they include settlement-free interconnect? Those kind of issues.
I think European regulators, and you're going to learn this, you already know it, I'm sure, but you're more familiar with the U.S., are quite different. I think their perspective on the internet is maybe even more balanced in some respects. They have been great supporters of ours because they realize that we're providing competition to phone companies that have been for 100 years dominating and monopolistic, and that we're driving innovation and change in infrastructure. Secondly, they like the fact that there are multiple ISPs in most markets and multiple mobile players. It's a highly competitive environment that they've achieved, and so they're appreciative of that. And I think they're going to be reluctant to make major changes to a functioning ecosystem. I hope that's the case anyway.
All right, I want to move on because I think we're running out of time. I want to talk a little bit more about your vertical integration and your move into content. Some people say it's a defensive move. Some people say it's an offensive move. Which of the two is it? Or is it
Very much an
something in
offensive
between?
move. I think that's important to understand. People know this, but for many, many years we owned 65 channels in Europe through this entity called Cello. And the truth of the matter is that cooking channel in Hungary or that kids channel in Poland really didn't make people subscribe to our services. As much as we loved them, they were great products and great channels. So we exited that business and decided to put our money into direct content investments that we felt over time would really drive the distribution platform.
With regards to the free-to-air ITV, for example, does it matter whether you have a 6.4% stake or do you want that blocking majority? Does that matter to you?
No, that interest really got a lot of people excited. We bought that really because we think the company was undervalued, and we like that management team and that operation. Doesn't mean we're going to go buy the company. It's a very large business, and it's not what we're planning today. But we like the strategic dialogue we're having with ITV. It's our largest market. They're the largest commercial broadcaster. They make television globally. I mean, they're a great company. So the closer we can be to a company like that, I think the better for us.
Okay, I'm just going to quote your CFO, who's made some very interesting comments recently. He said, we're interested in trying to create a European content champion because at the moment, content is dominated by the US. We're believers that Europe could become a large-scale content market in its own right. Does that worry you?
We're big believers in European content. We just commissioned a show in Marseille that's a family dynamic between the mayor and his kids, and you'll see us doing substantial European investments. And we don't want to do that in that case just for the French market, although it will be a French team and French language. But we want to make those global successes like we have with House of Cards. So it's really trying to get the best Danish crime TV, get the best French political dramas, and spread them throughout the world.
Mike, these are very, very ambitious plans, aren't they? And I want to challenge them a little bit because it may work in the US, but does it work in Europe where you have an extremely fragmented, very diverse market?
Vertical integration? I think it does in the end, but you have to pick your shots. I mean, you can't just vertically integrate to vertically integrate. I think you really have to find content that's working for your particular market. It is highly fragmented. There are, we're in 12 countries. They all have different desires and they speak different languages. And so we are looking at what works in the markets that we're in. Do we need to have content that works across all of those markets? Not necessarily. It'd be nice to. But as long as we're strong in each market, Belgian football doesn't work in Holland or Denmark. So, I mean, we are looking at content that works for our customers to drive our subscriptions. We're in the connectivity business. That's the first and foremost thing to understand. We are in the business of connecting people to great stuff. Great content. The internet is unbelievably vast and interesting and amazing. So that's the first business we're in. And anything that helps us win the customer's, mind share or share of wallet and be their connection, that's good for us. And if sometimes that means owning content, then I think that's what we'll do. But I don't see it being like a 50-50 for us. It's really a tactical and opportunistic thing.
Is it a Comcast that you want to emulate? For them, it's worked quite beautifully with
That
NBC
deal's
Universal.
Unique, though.
Full disclosure, I work for NBC Universal.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the Comcast NBC Universal deal was done at the low end of the market at an amazing price. It was a tremendously sophisticated and successful financial transaction, which also had some terrific benefits to them. And remember, in the U.S., you're capped. As Reed knows more than on how many customers you can have. We don't have that cap in Europe. We can own all the cable systems in the UK, Ireland, Switzerland. Not so in Germany, but in most other countries. So we don't have that cap. And I think Comcast was feeling a bit constrained, and that was their next move.
All right, Reed, want to come back to you. You've been investing heavily into your international expansion, but also into kids' content. And I wonder, if I look at the marketing spend, if I look at the content costs, what's the risk of you overspending on that?
Well, we continue to invest very heavily and betting on future growth throughout the world in terms of membership. So we're relatively high leverage, not financially, but in terms of content cost and content commitments. But if you look over the last 5 or 10 years, the growth of Netflix streaming and the growth of the internet and the growth of YouTube has all been very consistent. And so that's what gives us comfort, that it's not fundamentally about how Netflix executes. That makes some difference. But really, consumers are choosing click and watch video, whether provided by Horizon's cloud service or provided by Netflix. They want a sense of control.
I think most consumers want an interface, whether that resides in a box or in the cloud or in an app. It doesn't matter. They need curation. They need recommendation and search functionality. They need to navigate content. There's too much out there to just plug and play in that sense. And so it's almost irrelevant whether it's a device or an app to me. I mean, I see my kids. They're 16 and 13. They love Netflix. They love Apple TV. And they love Comcast, where I live in Denver. And if I got rid of Comcast, that's the first thing they'd be pretty upset about.
I want to ask you and want to talk about consolidation in the market. Do you think that a big player like Google or Yahoo could simply come in because they have the war chest, they can afford it, and they want content too?
Well, if you've got a big war chest, that's because you're a good steward of capital. And people with a lot of money don't tend to foolishly spend that money just because they've got a lot of it. They're good stewards of it. Google's an incredible company, and they're enormously technically aggressive and curious. They're not particularly interested in high-end content in the way that both of our businesses are.
Maybe they will be in the future. Do you think that's likely?
No, for the same reasons that Reed is describing. He would know them as well or better than we do. There's consolidation is definitely happening in Europe, but it's happening because there's a good economic reason for it to happen. There's too many mobile operators. There's too many cable operators. 7,000 cable operators. There's only 3 in the U.S. So their consolidation needs to happen here, so we can get good, strong infrastructure-based competition. We can invest in mobile networks because the reality of it is mobile service in Europe is not as good as the U.S. because it hasn't been invested in. So all that needs to happen. Consolidation across platforms, I think it's less likely. I don't see it happening. Certainly not to us.
Just one last question before I let you go. What's happening in season 3, House of Cards?
Season 3, House of Cards. It's going to be great. And Kevin Spacey is in power.
He's still in power. Okay. Is he still going to be president? We don't know. We'll find out. February, that is, right?
That's right.
All right. Thank you so much for that,
Thanks.
Reed Hastings
Great.
and Mike Reed.
Thank you.
That's a wrap from the Cable Marketing Conference here in Copenhagen. For Media Money, I'm Carolyn Ross. Thank you for watching.